Man, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of EOS. It's 1090 Jake, man. I'm rocking with y'all, and y'all rocking with me. And for this video, we're gonna be speaking on a Wild Wild West type shootout between two bikers, one of which was riding with his girlfriend on the back. He allegedly fired first. The other man shot back, and it hit his girl in the head.
I want to take you back in time. I want to take you back to the 1880s. Do you remember watching the old westerns where the outlaws were chasing each other through the countryside and shooting at each other? Well, let's advance to 2021. The same thing happened last night, except the outlaws, instead of being on horses, were on motorcycles. I guess you could call them iron horses. What I'm about to tell you is just a messed up situation by a bunch of messed up people.
Friday, October 8th, 2021. It was 7 minutes after midnight when Polk County sheriffs responded to Interstate 4 after reports of a motor vehicle crash. Deputies arrived on scene witnessing two motorcycles on the side of the interstate, a black male shaking a female who laid on the ground, and another person standing aside. The woman was unconscious, suffering an apparent gunshot wound to the head, as the deputy told the man to back away from her so he could render aid. That's when deputies attempted to take the man into custody, who became irate, battering an officer as he resisted arrest. While the scuffle took place, an empty holster fell from the man's body. He was eventually handcuffed, and a pat-down search produced another empty holster. Looking at the two motorcycles, one had 4 bullet holes, and a total of 18 shell casings from 3 different firearms were found scattered along the interstate over a half mile. EMS arrived on scene, transporting the woman to a nearby hospital, as the man in custody was identified as 38-year-old Ronald Donovan, a convicted felon stemming from a burglary and later on an aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, in which he was sentenced to 3 years in Florida State Prison. Meaning Ronald legally could not possess firearms under state and federal law, but he was found possessing 2 empty holsters next to a woman with a hole in her head. She was identified as 33-year-old Stephanie Myers, and investigators would later learn the two were in a relationship. Stephanie was on her way to the emergency room, Ronald was in the back of the squad car handcuffed, and the only one left at the scene was the man identified by police as witness number 1. Witness number 1 would claim all 3 of them were members of the Sin City Disciples Motorcycle Club. Also known as Sin City Nation, they're an African-American 1%er outlaw MC and one of the most well-known and oldest black outlaw MCs in the US, with multiple chapters across the nation and even in Canada, Europe, Asia, Australia, and South America. According to the witness, he was riding his own bike, Stephanie rode on the back of Ronald's, and a man the witness didn't know was riding with them. Earlier on, they'd been in Tampa attending bike night at a clubhouse belonging to another chapter. They'd left sometime between 10 and 11. Riding on the interstate, the unknown man took an exit as Ronald, Stephanie, and the witness continued riding in the inside lane. That's when 2 unknown bikers rode up behind them before passing them. But as they drove by, they revved their engines and veered towards their bikes before accelerating up the middle lane. That's when Ronald switched lanes and sped up after them as the witness followed behind. The witness described hitting 100 miles per hour before slowing down and losing sight of Ronald and Stephanie. Further up, he'd see Stephanie laid out on the side of the road as Ronald laid his bike down before rushing to her. As deputies initially arrived at the scene of the shooting, a second call to the sheriff's office reported a person shot at a Papa John's in Davenport, Florida, approximately 5 minutes away. Deputies arrived finding a 36-year-old Hispanic male who'd been shot in his lower back, who'd soon be transported to a nearby hospital in stable condition. A second man was with him, but only identified as witness number 2. He'd tell investigators they were both members of the Thug Riders Motorcycle Club. They ate at a restaurant in Tampa earlier that night and were making their way back to Orlando when they approached a group of 4 or 5 bikers on the interstate. They got in the middle lane to drive past them when the group of bikers accelerated, surrounding them from both sides and behind. That's when he heard 4 to 5 shots. He never saw anyone with a gun, and he couldn't describe any of the bikers that surrounded them. As they continued riding, his friend motioned with his leg for them to take the next exit, where they pulled into a Papa John's parking lot, and the man discovered he'd been shot in the back. Detectives would make contact with the second victim in the hospital. His story aligned with witness number 2, but he was able to provide more details. He described the man who fired the shot riding with the female passenger on the back of his bike. A burning pain stung from his back as the bullet had entered his body, and still riding his motorcycle, he drew his own weapon and returned fire as he told detectives he was in fear for his life. One of those bullets made contact with Stephanie's head, striking her above her ear and pushing through to the other side of her skull as it exited. He kept on riding, his legs now becoming numb as he took the next exit, pulling into the Papa John's and calling 911. He told detectives he'd fired a 9mm Glock 19 and had left it in his saddlebag. Detectives attempted to interview the suspect, Ronald Donovan, but he declined. 14 hours later, his girlfriend, Stephanie Myers, a 33-year-old mother of 2, was pronounced brain dead. Based on witness statements and evidence at the scene, law enforcement determined the 2 Thug Riders members were riding on the interstate when an unknown amount of Sin City disciples started chasing after them at speeds of over 100 miles per hour before surrounding them. At some point, a gunfight erupted similar to a Wild Wild West cowboy shootout on the back of horses, but these were bikes. A Thug Rider was shot in the back, allegedly by Ronald, before firing back in Ronald's direction and striking his girlfriend in the head. The only firearm recovered was the weapon used in self-defense by the Thug Rider that returned fire. 2 empty holsters were found on Ronald, and a 3rd empty holster was found in the saddlebag of witness number 1, the Sin City disciple. Based on the investigation, Ronald Donovan was arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder for shooting the Thug Rider member, on top of second-degree felony murder of his own girlfriend, who was fatally shot after he allegedly committed attempted murder. He'd also be charged with destroying/tampering with evidence, possession of a weapon by a convicted felon, 2 counts of resisting arrest with violence, and 2 counts of battery on a law enforcement officer. It's sad as hell to think this could be a case of pride gone wrong, and nothing more than a man trying to show who's dominant, resulting in his own girlfriend's death. His last moment with her before his arrest was shaking her, most likely begging her to respond and to come back. Now he's facing the possibility of life in Florida State Prison, as the man who fired the shot that killed his girlfriend has yet to be charged, and most likely won't be, under Florida Stand Your Ground law, in which if you're in fear for your life, you may defend it with deadly force. Now what's wild about this case is the idea that, let's say what happened to Ronald was true. He's riding on the bike with his girlfriend, his buddy's behind him. These 2 dudes pull up on the side of them, they rev their engines and kind of try to steer them off the road. Like a fuck you move, you know what I mean? And then they drive off. And in that moment, whether it was his own complex, whether he felt disrespected in front of his girlfriend, and we're only just imagining that this narrative is true, he decides to go fast as fuck and chase after them. Allegedly produced a weapon, fired at one of the men that did it. That man shot back and hit his girlfriend in the head, and she fell off the fucking motorcycle, right? And what's fucked up about that situation is, if the Thug Rider actually did try to, steer them off the road before driving off and then getting shot and firing back, it doesn't matter. He still stood his ground. He's not going to get charged with initiating the whole thing, because it's his word against theirs that even fucking happened. And if what the Thug Riders are saying is true, they were just trying to pass by and they got surrounded by a group bigger than what was actually said by the, fucking disciples or whatever. If they were surrounded by 4 to 5 bikers because these dudes were just trying to seem like some bullies or whatever, Buddy pulls out his shit after getting shot, fires back, he's 110% in the right. And it's even worse for the Sin City disciples, because you got this guy who is in the opposite. I don't even know if they're rivals, so I don't want to make it seem like they're 2 rival gangs, but it's obviously a different motorcycle club. And this guy, took a bullet, but returned fire and killed the female who is a fucking member of the Sin City disciples. So he gets to walk away without any charges, and he's killed one of y'all's. What fucking surprised me about this is the amount of talking, of witnesses. Both MCs, both motorcycle clubs have people talking. There's 2 witnesses for the Thug Riders. Both of them gave statements. One of them just couldn't describe anyone and said he didn't see a gun. But the guy that got shot full blown said, yeah, the guy that shot me had a girl riding on the back of his bike. You just identified Ronald. You identified him as the shooter. You know what I'm saying? And for Ronald, he didn't say shit. The woman obviously couldn't. But the Sin City disciple was also a witness. And none of what he said is gonna help Ronald's defense. So Ronald's pretty much fucked on both sides because both sides gave statements that are gonna be used against him. Now the thing about self-defense, lethal self-defense, when you kill a motherfucker, the best thing that can happen for you in court, the best thing that can happen for you in this situation is if it's one-on-one. If it's me and it's you, you try to do something to me and I kill you. Because if you're dead and no one else is involved, I'm gonna have to give a full statement to police explaining how I stood my ground. I can't just not say anything. You know what I mean? Because if you don't say anything and it's not on camera, it's on an interstate like this here, you say nothing in your own defense, what's it gonna look like? It's gonna look like you just shot somebody. So when you break down these stand your ground cases, these people have to explain what they did and how they actually stood their ground, right? But what's fucked up about it is if the person isn't dead, that means that you're snitching, right? You're in a motorcyclist club, you're not supposed to talk. If you're in a gang, you're not supposed to talk. But for the man that got shot, he gave a full-blown statement saying he was in fear for his life and he identified the shooter. And that right there, most likely is gonna get his ass kicked out of whatever MC club he's in if they're claiming to be outlaws, claiming to be a gang, unless it's just like a, hey, let's get together on a fucking Saturday and go ride around. But let me know what y'all think. Let me know which narrative makes more sense to y'all. I mean, there were comments saying the sheriff is making it sound worse than what it is because it's a black man with a white woman. This is a black motorcycle club, predominantly black, but it has a shitload of white members in it. Let me know what y'all think. I would put the GoFundMe for the woman that was killed, but there isn't one at this time. If there is, somebody please comment it, and I'll have that pinned in the comment section. It's 1090 Jake. I'm rocking with y'all, y'all rocking with me. Till next time.